what you were able to do was to bring them together, agree what the aims of this particular department were, and get them to go, well, we didn't realize. And actually, we see that we're both causing each other's frustrations. So it's that bringing them together, allowing them to vent, to empty that emotional baggage that they've got before moving anywhere. Because if you don't, they're going to loop back.
The question is from Thinking Focus.
Hi, I'm Paul.
Hi, I'm Ricky.
And the question is, how can I create trust between teams that don't get on?
Are you referring to general, or are you talking about us?
Ah, well, I don't. I think we're a lost cause, to be fair. let's go with general. It's easier. But occasionally teams, I mean, you've experienced this. Teams can internalize some of the frustration of the world, and there's nowhere else to put it. You can't really have a go at the customers, and you can't really have a go at suppliers, and you can't really have a go at people we don't get to see and talk to. So we turn on the team down the corridor that's trying to actually help us. And so it's not uncommon for teams to create a level of animosity with each other or a level of friction with each other for no other reason that they've got nowhere else to put their frustration.
That's interesting, because I think certainly my experience, what you find is they're struggling, and there's a level of deflection. So they start going, yeah, but we haven't had all the information from, or they haven't completed that step in the project. And if they get in first, they probably control the narrative. And I know I've been on the end of that, defending. It says, well, actually, that's not true. And then you're in a position where, by defending your position, you end up making things worse because you look like you're point scoring.
Yes, but that's a natural human behavior. We're quite tribal. We create our identity by belonging to a group, belonging to something, and part of belonging to something is knowing the rules and the ground rules and the associations of the thing I belong to. But it's also knowing what I am, what I'm not. So we often see fights between sales and service, or sales and finance, or
Sales and compliance.
yeah, well, sales and anybody really.
Sales and everybody, yeah.
But we also see fights between product A and product B's teams, or between strategic and tactical teams. Because people have to put themselves in a group. They have to go, well, I'm part of this group, which means we don't do the things that you do. So we're us and you're you, and therefore we're good and you're bad. None of which is true, of course. But that's kind of how our brains work. That's kind of what we do as human beings to work out who we are and what we identify with.
And we're all good at thinking our part of the process, part of the performance cake, as it were, is the most important. I mean, I remember joining sales as a young whippersnapper, and the old adage, sales pays the bills. So we walk around with a big chip on our shoulder. And the
Yeah.
reality is, well, okay, if that's true,
Well, try do it without a product.
do it without a product, do it without somebody to fulfill that product, do it without somebody to clear up the mess because you've overpromised, and in
Yeah.
terms of what they're going to get, and all of a sudden it kind of is a bit more, brings you back down to earth, let's say.
Yes. And so I think, these situations can occur really easily. And I find often when teams start fighting, there is an external pressure, and by external, I mean external to the teams. It might be internal to the company. It might be an expectation or a demand that somebody more senior has placed that causes conflict between the two teams. It might be marketplace. It might be I mean, post-pandemic, I saw a few of these supply chain issues. Suddenly, we can't actually do the things we've committed to because of a problem in a completely uncontrollable other part of the world. A factory issue or a transport issue. I felt for all those car companies, and we lived through this because we were looking for cars at the time in the pandemic who were going, yeah, we'll take your order. We have no idea when we can actually get the car to you because we don't know when we can get the bits. And if we do get the bits, we don't know if we can build it. And if we can build it, we don't know if there's any ships to put it on. And that then plays out with teams at a local level, I'm sure, having to deal with those conflicts and frustrations, none of which they created, none of which they have any control over. And they can't phone up the guy who's, caused the pandemic, or the guy who's, you know, taken all the chips so they can't build the car. They can't get to the root cause, but they can get to the next team in the chain and go, this is all your fault.
So how do we help teams then? And sometimes individuals, because we might be part of a senior team, head of department, an exec member,
Hmm.
and so seems to be getting all the resources, all the funding, and we're still expected to deliver what we need to deliver, with um, no consideration for the fact that we're having to work harder in order to do that, and maybe not even understand the rationale. And teams can feel the same as they're getting all the new headcount, for example. So that plays out. How do we help them with this?
Well, it's a really interesting. You just the way you phrased it made me sort of stop and think for a second there, because that often is the narrative. They are getting, they got, their. I heard one the other day, which is, and it was quite funny because I had two different sides of the argument, and they both told me that the most senior person favoured the other side, which I thought was really, it's like, so they clearly don't favour the other side. They just, you're not hearing the bits where that person is saying you're doing okay. You're only hearing the bits where she's defending the other team, and you're picking and choosing the information.
And maybe
And
trying to achieve a little bit of balance in the middle because they're caught between a rock and a hard
yeah, well,
place.
I think that's what the senior person was doing. He's going, look, that there is, there are good people on both sides, as the phrase goes. Um, but I think, firstly, when I deal with these situations, it's understanding that the barrier between you and the end goal you want, which is teams trusting each other and working together, is emotion, and you have to empty that emotion. You have to allow people to be heard. And my advice is, if you've got two teams that are bitter and fighting, allow them to be heard in their teams, not together. Because if they're
Yeah.
because
Uh,
it just becomes too much of a, well, you said this, no, you're wrong, we didn't do it, yes, you did, and that's not helpful. It just becomes a fight. But if
but
if
I've seen you though in workshops we've delivered together. I've seen you skillfully take two groups who are seeing the world very differently by using some of the techniques that we've developed, and actually allow them to go through this venting process in the same room, not necessarily not necessarily with each other, by the way.
not at the same table,
They
different
do it
ends of the room.
separate
Yeah.
parts, but
And if you
actually
notice, I put you in the middle as some sort of bouncer to keep them apart for the first bit.
but they're allowed to vent, they're allowed to get things off their chest,
Yes,
and actually then once they've emptied, your description, I think that then there's almost a, relax, and kind of think, "Well, okay, what does all that mean then?" Because
yes.
inevitably, there's things that we care about, there's things that we kind of moaned because we could, and there are things we don't care about.
And there are things that we're passionate about that we have no control over, and there are things that we're passionate about that we could choose to do something about.
Yeah, but what you were able to do was to bring them together, agree what the aims of this particular department were, and get them to go, "Well, we didn't realize, and we didn't realize.
Yeah,
Oh, and we thought you meant this, and we thought you meant that." And they're going, "And we thought you just couldn't be bothered, and we thought that you were just fighting us, and actually, we see that we're both causing each other's frustrations." So it's that bringing them together, allowing them to vent, to empty that emotional, baggage that they've got before moving anywhere.
exactly. If you don't, you just keep going back to the emotion,
They're gonna loop back, yeah.
and everything you try and do after it, you link back to it. So I start with going, let's get it out. Let's literally get it out on your own in your group. So you work in your team. Let's get it out in a very structured way. I give them specific questions I want them to work on. I don't want them just to go tell me everything. And typically, I focus those questions around four areas. So one is um, uncertainty. What questions have you got? What's not being answered? What aren't you being told? Two is unfairness. What's happened that you think is unfair? Three is control, particularly loss of control. Where do you need control you haven't got? What control do you want? And the fourth area is frustration. What's really frustrating you? And I get it all out, and I start by almost challenging nothing. Let them put the most ridiculous things up, let them put amazing things up. But as the session goes on and they get more out, I want to introduce the idea that just because you've written it down doesn't mean it's true. And so we gently start increasing the challenge over time. And what I'm looking to do is get the group to join in. I want them to start challenging their own thinking. And it's just cognitive work. It's just reframing. It's like, well, you said that, but what else might that mean? Well, you've put that up, but do you actually have any evidence for that, or is that just something you think? So it's a fairly simple thing, but I want to get them used to the idea of challenge, because then I can get them to go, right, which bits of this are really important? Which bits do you care about? Which bits are you prepared to take to the other group and talk about? And which bits do you just now need to let go of?
I mean, what I remember from that workshop was, almost a transformation of a us and them. They all liked each other individually,
Yeah, yeah.
but there was a real frustration that the expectations were too high. The expectations were not necessarily aligned to what we're kind trying to do. Um, we were causing our own kind of barriers, baggage, interference, noise. And then when you got all of that out and started to go, okay, so what are the examples then that underpin that particular feeling, that emotion, that example? And then all of a sudden you could see the trust start to build when people drop their guard and started to be more solution focused in the way
Yes.
that they thought about things, because now we're in this together, we're fighting that battle together.
Big, interesting phrase you use there, which is we are trying to move or everybody from being problem focused to solution focused. And that takes time. And it's really easy to go in at the start of these sessions and go, well, how can we fix this? Come on, everybody, come up with some ideas. Let's just fix it now. But you can't do that if there's a lot of emotion around, because they won't move. They'll stay in problem focus mode.
Well, it misses step one, which is buy-in, and in
Yeah.
order to buy in, I've got to let go of some
Got to let
stuff.
go. So to let go, I've got to be heard. I've got to feel like somebody's hearing my complaint. And the beauty of being heard is you have to start articulating yourself. And to articulate it, you have to think about it. And often, and you've seen this with loads of groups, Ricky, often just getting them to think about it in a way they can communicate it is enough to let them to force them to let go of it. Because when they take it out of their head and start having to put it into words, you can see this look on their face that goes, well, I'm really upset about this. But now I've said it out loud. I appreciate it's a really ridiculous thing to be upset about, and it's really trivial. But it really frustrated me at the time. And yeah, that's fine. That's okay.
But that's the brain playing them the cognitive tricks on them that
Yeah.
says, the chimp is basically going, I don't know why this is important, but it feels important, and I'm going to get angry about
Yeah.
it, and I'm going to get emotive. And then actually, when you allow the human brain to kind of calmly, rationally go, yeah, you're right. That's just ridiculous.
It's why, why journaling and things like that work so well, because you're just doing it for yourself. If you have to sit down at the end of the day and write out your frustrations, after a while, you start to sort out your frustrations because the brain can process them in a different way. And so I start with, if you've got teams that don't trust each other and it's really contagious. I mean, if it's just mild, you might not have to do this. But if it's really kind of got to loggerheads, you have to go through this emptying process so that they can be heard. And that starts with them being heard by somebody who's independent, and eventually getting it down to the things they really care about so they can share them with each other
But I
in a
think
controlled way.
I think the value that we add in that process is, A, we're neutral. We don't have a skin in the game, dog in the fight, whichever um, example you want to use. But actually, what we do is have a structure and a process to
Yeah.
take them through it, and one that is very visible, one that is very transparent. So there's no clandestine meetings going on in different rooms and things like that. It's all done together. It's all externalized and shared in a controlled way together. And actually, like I said, you see this this palpable change in transformation of emotion from, "Oh, well, if I wish I'd have known that before," type. we could have moved this forward. What a waste of time. We should have just talked about this. And I think, that was one of the kind of epiphanies of that particular example is we got them talking
We got them talking, yeah,
and we
because
got them talking about what mattered to them.
yes, and so you've gone bleh. You've then gone in all that vomit you've just thrown everywhere. What's the really important 2 or 3 things? You've then got those shared, but in a rational, structured, clear way, and we've helped the teams do that and have that conversation of, well, actually, this bit is important to us, and this is what it causes, and these are the consequences that you guys do this, and it causes this for us. And like you say, very often the answer you get back when you do that piece of work is they go, "Oh, we had no idea. Oh, well, what if we did it like this?" And they go, "Oh, that would be amazing." It's like, and as the facilitator, sometimes I'm standing there and going, "If you'd have just had this conversation at the start, but whatever, you know." And so you've now been heard and you've come up with some solutions. And then what you need to do, going back to this identity thing, is go, what unites you? What is the identity that brings these teams together in a common purpose? So if it's sales and service, that's relatively easy because you go, it's customer. Sales team, do you want your customers to have the best experience? Well, yes. Is service part of that? Well, they're essential. Right. Service, do you want to create great customer experiences and have customers that love you? Yes. How can you use, what's sales role in that for you? How can you use sales? What would happen if sales didn't bring in more customers or keep the customers on board or sell new products? So you bring them together in a common purpose so they become one group. And then you can talk about, okay, what's the rules of engagement? Yeah, how do we work together? Because very often with those groups, the last part of this, as well as kind of some general trust stuff, which I'll talk about in a second, the last part of this is to go, it's not going to be perfect. Just because we've all sat in a room and now had a big group hug doesn't mean that tomorrow something isn't going to happen and everyone's going to get upset. And right now, you only know how to fight with each other. So what you've got to learn to do is learn how to work together. And that's the last part of the process. So how are you going to work together? How are you going to escalate? How are you going to handle things that go wrong? How are you going to make sure you continue to communicate openly, fluently, clearly? Because if you don't, you'll just head back to where you started from.
Yeah, we're back in 6 months or whenever, helping you resolve another set of differences.
Now, when I'm doing that bit, what I'm using in the background, I don't know what you use, but I quite like the Frey model, Frances Frey. If you've not seen it, go and check her TED video. Absolutely awesome.
We'll drop a
Uh,
link in the description.
Yeah, so her trust model talks about 3 areas, and I just think they're really useful to think about. And I know there's loads of other trust models, and they probably all work here, but I just like these 3, particularly at a team level, because they work so well. So the first area is authenticity. How can the teams actually get to know each other? How can they get to be themselves? How can they get to have their own uniqueness while being into some shared values at the same time? So when salespeople start going, but they don't see the world like us, well, that's okay because they're a service team or they're a finance team or they're a, I always sort of make the joke of, would you really want salespeople running payroll? And
But I
everybody immediately goes, no, 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 no,
well,
no,
no, there'd be no money left for a start.
exactly. We get paid on a different day every month as well.
When you think about that example we talked about, before, what you saw was a very guarded group at the beginning to one that started to show more authenticity, their real selves, because they've been allowed to get things off their chest. They've been
Yeah.
given permission to do that. They bared their soul, and with that comes a level of vulnerability. How am I going to be perceived by saying these things? And what we found were people would expand on their point in terms of and what that really means is and what it feels like, and they started to show the passion, the energy, the emotion attached to those things. So you started to see some of that authenticity really start to play out.
And that then brings to the second bit, which is there real empathy between these teams? So if people are being authentic, are people actually listening? Do people show they care? Do they act like they're hearing other people's concerns and want to help? or do they act like they just want to use the other team as a, in the same way as they use the stationary cupboard? Because if there's no real empathy, they're never going to build proper trust with each other. So again, slowing some things down, getting people to listen, getting people to ask questions about the other person and not just the problem, getting people to acknowledge the complexity and the difficulty that other teams might have. It's just little things. I learned this back when I was selling. If you're going to ask a service team to do something that's not, standard, complete within their job, just acknowledge it's not standard. Like, I'm really sorry. I've done this. I've solved this thing. I need some help with this. I know that's put a little bit of extra work on you. I'm really sorry. How can I help with that? Is probably enough to make them go, no, don't worry about it. I'll do it all, and happily take it off you because you've showed some empathy and understanding of their predicament.
Yeah.
And you haven't treated them like they're sitting there waiting for you to hand out some work because they're bored.
Yeah, I've done this. You need to fix it. You need to sort it out. Clearly, is a great way to find somebody who's going to dig their heels in and fight against
Yeah,
you. But I think that empathy was again, coming back to that real example where there was a shift from, folded arms in the morning, almost a, yeah, get what you're saying. I'm just not buying that you're listening to our problems, listening to our issues. You've got the solution already mapped out. Not once have you taken the time to listen to how we think the issue is playing out, the impact that's having on us and others that we're serving in the organization. And I think, again, there was this kind of visible shift of, oh, they do understand. They do. They are
yeah.
listening because, what they're trying to be is one step ahead of us so that we don't face these problems. They're just not telling us.
And that comes back to, often when particularly when the things are a little bit broken, we have to sort of teach people to listen to understand, not listen to respond. You don't need to respond. You just need to listen. If you want to ask questions, you want to get clarity, that's fine. But just drop the defensive mode. And so often I find myself in a lot of these workshops going, no, you're not on trial. You don't need to defend yourself. Just listen. Hear what they said. And then you get a chance to give your point of view later.
But that's a natural, again, that's a system one response where they're seeking to protect
Yeah.
how they've come to it, how they've made the decision. But to your point, that's just gonna
Make it worse.
erode trust, not build trust.
And then the last part in phrase model. So you have authenticity, empathy. The third thing she talks about, which is really key to this, she calls it logic. But does this all make sense? Do I understand what you want? Do you understand what I want? Do they fit together properly? Are there some bits in the middle that we haven't really talked about that are absolutely key to all this, and we need to agree on them? And do we communicate well? I mean, it's one thing for it to all make sense, but can you explain it to everybody? To particularly people who don't think and act like you or have your view of the world.
And that can be quite tough for leaders. Not the communication bit, because quite a lot that we work with are really good at communicating, but it's bridging the gap between the vision and the execution, because most people's question sits there go, yeah, it's all well and good, but how are we going to do that? And what the leaders perhaps not articulated as well as they could is, and we're going to need you guys to help us figure out the gap between where we are today and where we want to be, because you've got the expertise, you've got the know-how, you've got the knowledge and the resources, and quite frankly, my job's not to do that, it's to lead us through this and get us to the other side.
Yeah, and I think part of that is being really good at creating that clarity of expectation and understanding, and again, everybody on the same page. But the other part of that is understanding that just because you've told them doesn't mean they've heard it yet. Um,
Well, it's that
and
old adage, by the time you're getting bored, they're just probably starting to get it.
Yeah, and I think, if it's complex and it's difficult, or there's animosity involved, or there's emotion involved, this idea that you can over communicate is, I just don't think it's true. I think, just keep hammering the message home.
Well, I think there is a concept of over communication if you keep talking about the wrong things and don't take time to listen
Mm,
to what's coming back the other way. So you can
That's fair.
tell them till you're blue in the face. And you know, I fell foul of this as a manager in my early years. I used to sit there and go, well, I've told them, and I've told them. What I hadn't done was done the loop back and go, and what do you think that means? Paint that done to me so I understand you get it, so I understand that you know what we're trying to achieve and why.
And it's really interesting because having come from a sales background, and I see this in some of the teams we work with, but I also sort of sit and cringe and go, "Oh, I did that a lot." Is this kind of misunderstanding that just because everybody on your side of the fence, everybody in your organization, it works for the same company, that they're aligned to your view of the world, so that when we do something internally, we don't have to communicate in the way that we do it with a customer.
Yeah, they'll just get it.
They'll just get it, and that they're everybody's just sitting there waiting to do something for this customer, and of course that's just not true. So again, I wish I'd have known that back when I was running a sales division, that actually communicating internally is probably 60% of the work, and communicating externally is probably 40%. But I was probably doing 80% external and 20% internal, and creating my own problems and creating my own, creating teams of a mistrust within the organization, because I wasn't doing enough work internally to smooth that over.
And I think my lesson from my financial services days was when we were at our most productive, and I mean organizationally, it's when, you know, we built strong relationships as department heads, as, you know, leaders of different parts of the business. We took time to connect beyond the job. So it wasn't just, I've got a problem, my team needs you to sort this out. It was, you know, how you doing? What's going on? You know, that kind of just spitballing over a coffee on different things, as opposed to it's all business. And by building an emotional connection, an understanding, meant that when we did have business issues, and we did, we were able to sit down and calmly go, how do we fix this? And we would work together and we collaborate. And ironically, it was the year the chief exec and the board decided that we were going to merge with another organization. And the board's comment to us as the senior team was, we just never imagined you were going to be this good in terms of performance. And you go, well, that's really cool, but now we're all, you know,
Yeah,
on the
now
hop
we're on
for
it.
our jobs now. But it was nice to know that, you know, when you people talk to us about high performing teams, actually trust was the bedrock of that high performing team. That was the foundation on which everything was built. Did we agree all the time? No. But did we have ways to resolve those disagreements? Yes.
And that's a really interesting point to sort of end this on, which is, when the leaders of these teams can't do that, the journey the team has to go through is much harder. And very often, you see me do this. I know you've done it, Ricky. We sit leaders in a room and go, "What team are you in?" And they start talking about their function, and you go, "No, no, no, no. The team you're in is the group of people sitting around this table.
Yeah.
You lead some teams, but your teammates are the people sitting around this table. And if you guys don't get on, if you guys can't work out how to work with each other, people working for you never stood a chance."
Next time on The Question Is.
Why do I need a better relationship? Why do I need rapport with this person? What is it I'm trying to do? And is that all about me? Is that all about them? Is that all about an outcome? Or is it just genuinely, actually, rapport will help and it doesn't matter what it's about? This is a person I'm going to have to interact with, and being able to get on with them and having a sense of rapport and in the moment with them would help.
To find out how Thinking Focus can unlock the potential within your organization, go to www.thinkingfocus.com, where you'll discover more about the work we do, helping our clients increase productivity and enable change.